Penn State plans to formally honor former head coach Joe Paterno for the first time since his firing nearly 5 years ago. The ceremony will take place during the Nittany Lions' September 17th game against Temple. This according to the university. Paterno finished his career as the winningest coach in FBS history with 409 wins, but he was unceremoniously fired in November 2011 in wake of the Jerry Sandusky child sex abuse scandal. He died 2 months later, and a statue outside the stadium was removed the following summer. Stephen A., do you have a problem with Joe Paterno being honored?
Without question. He should not be honored. And I agree with my colleague, my esteemed colleague, Reese Davis, when he said that the university comes across as incredibly tone deaf. This is a disgrace. There's no other way to slice it. And let me say this about folks who support Joe Paterno. Let's understand that he made Penn State what it is in terms of putting their name on the map. He was the coach for 46 years there, brought national championships to that university. We all know what he accomplished. We all know that in terms of the money poured into the program, it had practically everything to do with Joe Parr. That cannot be ignored. But the reason why you take this hardline stance against him is because of the seriousness of the things that took place under his watch and how little he did about it. We're talking about a guy in Jerry Sandusky who is an absolute scum of the earth, who was sentenced from 30 to 60 years in prison because of decades of child abuse, the residue of that. This is the former defensive coordinator for Joe Paterno. This is the same defensive coordinator that somebody came to Joe Paterno and told him about what Jerry Sandusky had done. This is the same Jerry Sandusky that one of Joe Paterno's, or I don't know whether it was, I keep forgetting whether it was a coach or an assistant coach or, you know, somebody that was an intern or whatever, you know, had seen Jerry Sandusky literally sodomizing a youngster and had told Joe Paterno about that. And Joe Paterno alerted the proper authorities. And here's what the people of Penn State don't realize with all the bloviating that they do in support of him. Essentially, you're saying he was the institution. He meant that much to us. He was that impactful. You're not realizing that you're making the case against Joe Paterno better than any of us ever could. Why? Because even though we know that Joe Paterno was not, you know, he wasn't the one committing child abuse or anything like that, the fact of the matter is that he could have done more and elected not to because it wasn't the priority to him that it should have been. This is the same Joe Paterno that, according to reports, the president once came to his house to fire him. Joe Paterno threw the man out of his house and said, "I'm not going anywhere." Okay, that's how much power Joe Paterno had. You couldn't just get rid of him because he was that influential, that powerful, and he wasn't going to go anywhere until he damn well felt like it. So if you had come to him and said Ohio State was cheating or Michigan State or Michigan was doing something under the table and it was affecting his football program, somehow, some way, you know he would have done something about it then. But you did nothing about Jerry Sandusky. Even when he was not your defensive coordinator, he was still allowed to have an office on campus and, at least figuratively, if not literally, use it as a recruiting tool to ingratiate himself with youngsters he would ultimately abuse. There was something that Joe Paterno could have done about this. He did not. That's why his statue was removed. It's why the Board of Trustees ultimately axed him as the coach. And that cannot be escaped. He is not Jerry Sandusky. He is not the despicable, reprehensible lowlife that should be under the jail and the key should be thrown away and he should be laid down there with the sodomites. That's not who Joe Paterno is. That's Jerry Sandusky. But Joe Paterno is an iconic figure who was incredibly influential, who was negligent in his duties to use that influence to get rid of a serial abuser and pedophile. That is not somebody you celebrate at any turn. You leave him alone, you let him rest in peace, but what you don't do is crop up memories of him to try and celebrate him. He neutralized that with his inaction, and there is no excuse for Penn State to take this path. It is despicable, it is tone deaf, it is embarrassing, and they need to be called out on it. They should be ashamed of themselves. They really should.
To quote Mark Antony from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, "The evil that men do live after them, the good is oft interred with their bones. So let it be with Joe Paterno." It's not that the good is wiped away by the bad in Joe Paterno's case. It's that they are weighed. And in the balance, the bad outweighs the good here, as much good as he did. You know, there are so many young lives devastated. Listen to an investigative report by Louis Freeh, the former director of the FBI, on July 12th. Here's Paterno's role in the Sandusky scandal. The report concluded that Paterno and other officials, but as Stephen A., you eloquently made the case, Paterno had an enormous amount of influence and power there. Quote, failed to take any steps for 14 years to protect the children who Sandusky victimized. Now here, this is not just an issue of Penn State doing something like actively taking down a statue or a name off a library, which was the right thing to do. That's something you actually have to go out and do. You have to change something that's there. There's nothing there right now. The university is intending to do something new to honor him. That's outrageous. We're not here even debating, well, should something stay or should it change? We're saying, should you change the status quo at the moment to further honor Paterno, given the events with Jerry Sandusky, given Paterno's, at the very least, alleged inaction? Well, it's certainly inaction for the most part, but how much he knew, there seems for many to be reason to believe he knew enough that he could have done more. It's not good enough. I mean, all the good is not good enough to outweigh that. And I don't take pleasure in it, but Joe Paterno has no business being honored here. Certainly not for them to take, for lack of a better word, proactive steps to initiate some kind of new honor. That's outrageous.
They're trying to convince us. They're not trying to convince us. They're trying to make sure that we remember the good that he did. What they don't understand is that the good that he did was for Penn State. But his negligence led to such disgusting results on a part of Jerry Sandusky. It assisted in its inactivity, in its absence, in its negligence. It assisted Jerry Sandusky to commit some of the most vile acts we can imagine.
Can you imagine, Stephen A., can you imagine being the parent? Can you imagine being the parent of a child who was victimized after Paterno was made aware of what was happening, after the fact, and there were many? Can you imagine being that parent?
I don't care if he won the national championship every year. The fact that he turned a blind eye to these kids getting molested, and I'm glad that Penn State's moved on, but I'd like to know how these victims feel. This makes me sick. It's sick. And I'm just reading a tweet. It's so fitting. Joe Paterno to be honored with a moment of silence, something he was really good at.
Yes, that's a great tweet, actually.
I love it.
A moment of silence, something he was great at. He was silent. And listen, I feel bad for his family because his son came on the show, but Max, before you arrived, Molly, even before you arrived, his son actually came on the show, trying to fight on his behalf, and they were engaged in legal action against the NCAA, if I recall correctly. But listen, listen, you can't blame the Paterno family for coming to the defense of their dad, because they'll say we don't know all the facts, and there are a lot of things that they don't want to believe, and there may be things that they know that we don't know. We respect that. But in the end, based on what has been reported, based on what we've learned, the level of negligence on the part of Joe Paterno, the best thing you can do for him is just let him rest in peace. Don't even bring up his name anymore. That's because right. Inevitably, he is associated with Jerry Sandusky, as vile as Sandusky is, because of how powerful Paterno was and how he did not use it to eradicate everything that was Jerry Sandusky is criminal in and of itself. There's no escaping
I think there is a lesson here, by the way. Even if you think you're doing right by something, an organization, an institution, a group, by sweeping something under the rug, that's not usually the way it turns out. That only makes it worse. And had had Joe Paterno truly had a clear thought about what was best for the institution that he was perhaps trying to protect, if, as many of us believe, he could have done more, then he made the wrong choice by sweeping it under the rug, if in fact that's what he did. The right choice would have been to shine a light on it. Sunlight is the best detergent, and in this case, it could have prevented multiple tragedies.
As soon as he heard about this, he needed to dead the whole thing.
Of course.
That's what needed to happen.
First Take is brought to you by StubHub, your ticket out. Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance. And the all-new Audi A4.
In a newly released clip from the documentary The Hurt Business, a deeper look at MMA, former UFC champion Ronda Rousey refers to mixed martial arts as the most responsible form of violence.
Ignorance of the sport is the only real barrier that it has to overcome. And I think that a lot of people that are ignorant of it think that it promotes violence when it really is the most responsible outlet for it. It's a human instinct to fight. And if you try to suppress it entirely and put everyone in a bubble wrap society, that's when people end up going nuts and shooting movie theaters. You know, if any of those people that had all of that aggression built up in them had some sort of outlet, I think that we would have a lot more societal health because of it.
Max, you like, love, or hate Rousey's comments there?
I love her comments. I think she's absolutely right. I do a thought experiment, Stephen A., where I prove to people that boxing, but it could be combat sports, is actually their favorite sport. No, football is, baseball is, basketball is. If you come to a street corner and there are two guys playing pickup, a little flag football game going on another corner, someone putting a golf ball in the third corner, and a fight on the fourth corner, where's the crowd? Crowd's around the fight. It's intrinsically more interesting. Why is it more interesting? Because fighting is the literal imposition of will. Everything else is just the figurative imposition of will. One player can't return another's serve. That means the first player imposed their will figuratively on the other player. The ball is a surrogate for their will. But in fighting, Ronda catches someone with a shot and they go down. Their brain says, legs, get up. They can't do it. She has physically imposed her will. Or a fighter's in a submission hold. They don't want to submit, but they have to. The other fighter has physically imposed their will. It's intrinsically more compelling. It is absolutely the safest possible outlet for violence in a way that other sports are not. And even boxing, which was reformed over the years to be less like MMA over 100 years ago and more, quote-unquote, civilized. You know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. What wound up happening as an unintentional consequence of putting gloves on fighters and letting them hit each other and being more civilized, not letting them follow up on advantages and pound each other while on the ground, what happens is fighters wind up getting up with concussions and fighting on for 10 and 12 rounds, whereas in MMA, in Ronda's sport, in the UFC, if you have an advantage, you get to follow it up. It seems brutal, but in fact, it's much safer because then the contest ends, there's less sustained damage, etc. I totally agree with Ronda Rousey.
So do I, but it's far more simpler for me than you just explained. In our society, because of what ails us as a society, you want to release, you want to vent, you want to exhale. And what gives you a better opportunity to do that than MMA? You can punch, you can kick, you can wrestle, you can scratch, you can claw, you can elbow, you can do all of these different things, and you can vent and unleash. And because you have the license to do that, and in the UFC and other MMA sports actually get paid for it, you're less inclined to do it outside of that octagon. It's really that simple to me.
Yeah, Rousey, I find when she opens her mouth, usually has interesting things to say. And,
she's really smart.
And she is, and she's pretty, in a straightforward way, right about this.
I think the other thing, too, is that a lot of people don't realize with this, mixed martial arts, whichever discipline you study, it teaches a lot of discipline and respect, too.
Of course.
I mean, your kids are also studying a form of martial arts,
well,
right?
They're going to start. But, yes, because I think it's important for young women, given the realities of the world we live in, what we just discussed in the last segment, can handle themselves. At least I like my daughters.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Nope,
Absolutely.
100%.
Same with mine. Absolutely.
So, gentlemen, Labor Day weekend.
Yes.
What are we? Anything we're fired up about?
Hey, listen, I'm gonna watch Alabama beat USC tomorrow night.
Yeah.
I'm definitely gonna do that. You know, I'm gonna spend time with the family at the barbecue. You know, I'm gonna chill out. There's no question about that. But I expect Alabama to handle their business, and I'm gonna get set for this NFL season. Coming up next week is a big week. Going to be talking a lot about the NFL because a lot of games, the start of the season is coming up.
Yep.
We all can't wait. Let's face reality. Summer's the hardest time in the world because even though we respect baseball, we don't love baseball the way as a society we used to. We love our football, and here it comes.
Yeah, here it comes. And by the way, here it comes like tomorrow. FSU got a tough Week 1 matchup. They got to win after I just said
Yes,
if you
sir.
get to
You're taking
October
the field.
29.
This man.
Roll
I'm
Tide.
taking the field.
Roll Tide.